Thank you for watching Darker Things, the series that brings you deep dives into history's most disturbing events, personalities, true crime, conspiracy theories.
In May of 1993, three second-grade boys were murdered. Their bodies discovered on May 6, 1993. In the months that followed, three teenage boys, Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. would be arrested, tried, and convicted. Eccles was sentenced to death while Baldwin and Miskelly Jr. both received life sentences. And for many people, this would have been the end of the story. Signed, sealed, delivered, justice served. But an HBO documentary called Paradise Lost would turn the case on its head and cause far-reaching consequences even up until this day. As of 2011, Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr. walked free due to an afford plea. Some say that excellent journalism fueled by celebrity calls for true justice exonerated them. Others still claim that the actual murderers roamed free because the court of public opinion and cancel culture pressured the state of Arkansas judicial system to let the West Memphis 3 go. Can the justice system be manipulated by the media? Do killers really walk free? Is the judicial system really capable of backpedaling and letting confirmed murderers walk free? This will be the focus of today's episode. Before we continue, I would just like to take this moment and personally thank each and every one of you who have been watching, liking, and commenting on the videos. It helps us know that there is a desire for the truth to come out. We thank you even more for helping us get to 105 subscribers. If you haven't subscribed and would like to see more of what we produce here, please subscribe. One final thought before we begin. We recently lost our microphone and have been using the stock microphone that came with our laptop. This has clearly had a significant impact on the quality of our audio. In light of that, what you will be hearing as far as narration goes will be my voice, but one that is somewhat simulated. This should be remedied in about a week's time. And now, the show must go on. Hey there, in today's chat, we're gonna dig into the media hype that went down after the convictions. So, let's kick things off. How did the whole West Memphis 3 Innocents movement get rolling? So, back in '96, things kicked off with this documentary called Paradise Lost. That's where the West Memphis 3 Innocents movement began to take shape. So, Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinitsky were the masterminds behind it all. They directed, produced, and edited the documentary. HBO got in on the action too and spread it around. Here's the scoop. Berlinger thought they were making a flick about troubled kids, diving into the nitty-gritty of why youngsters end up doing bad stuff. The whole deal was sold to the victims' families with the pitch that it was all about protecting children, and that's why they signed on to be part of it. They, too, wanted to raise awareness so that this, hopefully, can never happen to anyone else again. But hold up, there's a twist in the tale. The filmmakers ended up flipping their script. Berlinger spilled the beans in a 2012 chat with Huffington Post, saying that during the initial months hanging out with the victims' families, they were more convinced than ever that the kids were guilty. Things took a turn, didn't they? But here's where it gets interesting. They managed to score a meetup with Damien, Jason, and Jesse behind bars, and bam, everything flipped. Suddenly, they started leaning towards a whole new perspective. Now, hold on to your hat, because some of these new ideas were more like wild guesses than hard facts. Get this, one of their offbeat reasons was Jason being too skinny. Yeah, they thought his scrawny arms meant he couldn't have pulled off the crime. Go figure. I gotta say, that's just downright crazy and ridiculous. Let me break it down for you. Take Skylar Nees, for instance. If she were still around, I bet she'd tell you how her two skinny ex-besties, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Shove, had no issue stabbing her to death with their slim arms. This whole notion that you need to pump iron or be a certain weight to commit a crime, it's just plain silly, total nonsense. So, here's the scoop. Once the filmmakers hung out with the West Memphis 3, they went from just telling a story to becoming hardcore advocates. And get this, the film conveniently skipped over some vital info. I've spilled the beans on that in past episodes. They even slipped up on some facts. Like, did you know the West Memphis police grilled Jesse for a whopping 12 hours before he spilled the beans about the crimes? Crazy, right? Except the length of the supposed interrogation is up for debate. Okay, check this out. Jesse spilled the beans about 4 hours and 20 minutes into the questioning. Now, let me break it down for you. Paradise Lost wasn't just telling a story, it was all about sowing doubt in those convictions. They handpicked bits and pieces to stir up talk and debates about the justice system and that whole mob mentality which I'm fine. The original plan of diving into why kids go off the rails or protecting more kids from the same fate. Yeah, that kinda got lost along the way. So, here's where it gets kinda wild. The filmmakers went all out and actually had the guts to throw in uncensored crime scene footage. I mean, we're talking about the murdered boys, laid out on the ground, tied up like a hog, and totally naked. It was like the peak of exploitation, seriously pushing the limits. And get this, when it comes to raising doubt about who did the deed to Stevie, Michael, and Christopher, the first documentary was like child's play compared to part 2. It got way more intense. Alright, buckle up for Paradise Lost. Revelations. Joe and Bruce ditch any hint of doubt about the West Memphis 3's innocence this time around. It's like they tossed the term documentary out the window and went full on with their protagonists, the misunderstood trio of Damien, Jason, and Jesse. Plus, they painted their supporters as the heroes, the brave souls behind the WM3.org support website. It's a whole new ball game, my friend. Oh, and they threw in their villain, John Mark Byers, the stepdad of Christopher Byers. In this round, they zeroed in on him as a possible suspect. A chunk of Revelations was basically the John Mark Byers show, with him putting on a show for the camera. Picture this. He's taunting Eccles as he strolls by during an appeal hearing or going all out trashing the West Memphis 3 supporters. It's like a real-life drama unfolding on your screen. Byers had this thing for going all Shakespearean in every scene, like tossing out dramatic lines left and right. But the one that really gave me the chills, picture this. He goes back to the crime scene, creates these fake graves for Jason, Damien, and Jesse, and then sets the whole thing on fire. Revelations also sowed a seed of doubt, hinting at whether John Mark Byers might have had a hand in his wife Melissa's death. Talk about a plot twist. We even covered this so-called suspicion in his wife's death during our episode on Victoria Hutchison, who claimed that Melissa Byers confided in her that she believed John Mark Byers was the murderer the day before she was discovered dead. And her credibility is questionable. Just goes to show you how mad people stir the pot in this narrative. The movie totally nailed it, painting John Mark Byers as the bad guy. And you know what? Byers practically handed it to them on a silver platter. Turns out, he was getting paid to act like this. Yeah, he sold out and didn't bat an eye. The guy was all about soaking up the spotlight and putting on a grand performance. So, here's the twist. While he played the villain, turns out he wasn't the one behind the murders. Crazy, right? Oh, and guess who's back in the mix? Dan Stenow, Jesse Muskelly's lawyer, still fighting the good fight for Jesse. This time around, he's diving into some alternative ideas about the wounds on the boys' bodies. Enter criminal profiler Greg Turvey. In a nutshell, their wild theory is that a bunch of the wounds on those poor kids might have actually come from animals. I know, it's a head-scratcher. Now, they're onto this whole human bite mark thing. The movie's throwing shade, wondering if Byers is the culprit behind it. And here's where it gets all mysterious and convenient. Byers, now rocking dentures, keeps changing his story about why his teeth are meal. The movie wraps up with Byers acing a polygraph test and gloating about it. But here's the kicker, despite all that, tons of West Memphis 3 supporters still think he's the one responsible. Talk about leaving us hanging. Alright, before we dive into the third documentary, let's talk about Mara Leverett. So, she's an author and journalist, but she kinda writes more like an advocate, you know. She went all in on John Mark Byers as a suspect in her book Devil's Knot, which hit the shelves in 2002. The funny thing is, she sort of brushed aside important deets like the fact that Byers had an alibi. Yes, facts can sometimes take a backseat when you're spinning a juicy tale. Hold onto your hat, because between Paradise Lost Parts 2 and 3, a celebrity tsunami hit the scene. I'm talking Peter Jackson, Johnny Depp, Eddie Vedder, Henry Rollins, Trey Parker, Matt Stone, the Dixie Chicks, Marilyn Manson, Dave Navarro, and a bunch more, all joining forces and rallying to free the West Memphis 3. It was like a star-studded call to action. So, check this out. They raked in millions for the cause, and that brings us to Paradise Lost, Purgatory. The filmmakers kicked things off by revisiting the first 2 docs before diving into what was happening at that moment. Now, brace yourself, Damien Eccles' defense team, backed by supporters and a squad of celebrities, threw some serious cash around. They hired top-notch forensic scientists to dig into DNA and other evidence that got left untouched during the 1994 trials, all in the hopes of scoring a fresh shot at justice. Talk about a game changer. It also poses the probability of juror misconduct. Alright, let's flip the script a bit. So, here's the deal. The story also throws the spotlight on John Mark Byers. He used to be the guy folks side-eye, but now he's all reformed and totally on board as a West Memphis 3 supporter. The plot takes a turn, shifting from one stepdad to another. This time, it's Terry Hobbs, the stepdad of Stevie Branch. Things are getting interesting. Even as we did our own deep dive, we placed focus on Terry Hobbs. It can be difficult to remain objective in light of this constantly new influx of new evidence and information. Hold on tight, because here's where the plot thickens. Terry Hobbs steps into the spotlight as the new villain in the story, all because of this little hair found on one of the ligatures. The mtDNA couldn't clear him as the source of that hair. And guess what? Another hair shows up near a tree stump, and even they can't rule out Terry's buddy at the time, David Jacoby. We'll dig into more DNA testing drama in a bit, so stay tuned. Alright, here's the scoop. So, in addition to the hair drama, the film starts poking around in Terry's past, kinda like they did with John Mark Byers. They're digging into Terry's troubles with Pam and her family, trying to stir up some concerns. And here's the kicker, Pam. Well, she's had a change of heart. Now, she doesn't outright say the West Memphis 3 did the deed, and she's not pointing fingers at Terry directly, but her family. Yeah, they're not holding back. Things are definitely taking a twist. Alright, buckle up because we gotta dive into something important here. There's this whole deal about Terry Hobbs and John Mark Byers having some strange similarities. People are trying to connect the dots and use it as a reason to call one of them a murderer. Let me throw an example at you. John Mark Byers' ex-wife's family actually called up the West Memphis police, saying he might be the one behind the murders. Now, on the flip side, Pam's family had their suspicions about Terry, but they didn't dial up the police with those concerns back in the day. Looks like their accusations against Terry mostly stemmed from the seriously messy problems he and Pam were going through at the time. And let me tell you, things were getting really ugly. Let's talk about Byers for a sec. Even his alibis are under the microscope. Here's the deal, Byers' alibis are kinda shaky, with his stepson Ryan Clark and the Garners not exactly singing the same tune. People use these instances to point fingers at him. Now, it's not much different for Terry. Over a decade after the murders, when folks grilled him about it, some details didn't quite add up. Here's the thing, you might not be a fan of Mark or Terry for their past actions, and you don't have to be, but it's crucial to separate personal feelings from the cold, hard facts of the case and figure out who's really responsible for those murders. Alright, let's wrap this up. So, the film ends by telling us there's this big evidentiary hearing scheduled for December 2011. But hold on, here comes the jaw dropper in August 2011, out of the blue. The West Memphis 3 are set free, thanks to this rare thing called the Afford plea. Now, I delved into this in some other episodes, but what's the deal with an Afford plea? Well, it's like a guilty plea, but with a twist. The defendant says they're innocent and doesn't fess up to the crime, but admits the prosecution's got enough evidence to make a judge or jury think they're guilty. It's a legal curveball, for sure, whether you're a fan of it or not. The Afford plea is basically saying, fine, I'll take the guilty label. Now, some parents, like John Mark Byers and Pam Hobbs, have shifted gears and no longer think the West Memphis 3 did the crime. But here's the twist. The majority of the families, including Todd and Dana Moore and Stephen Branch Sr., they're still holding on to the belief that the 3 are guilty. Now, Melissa Byers, she's no longer around, so it's a bit of a mystery how she'd feel today or back in 2011. But when she was alive, she took her belief to the grave, thinking the West Memphis 3 were the ones who killed her son. It's a heavy load to carry. Guess what? Paradise lost. Purgatory got itself an Oscar nomination in 2012. And hey, I got this letter from the Moores that sheds some light on what they think about the whole nomination business. This letter really lays out the raw reality the family's dealing with, cutting through the sensationalism of these one-sided documentaries. Let me share it with you. Dear Chairman Epstein and members of the documentary branch of the Academy, we are Todd Moore and Dana Moore. Our cherished 8-year-old son, Michael, was brutally murdered on May 5th, 1993 by Jesse Liz Kelly, Damian Eccles, and Jason Baldwin. Liz Kelly was tried and convicted in 1994. Baldwin and Eccles were convicted by a separate jury later that year. All 3 entered Alfred pleas to our son's murder August 19, 2011. They are now, as they have been for the past 17 years, they have been guilty as a matter of fact since the moment water flooded Michael's lungs after he was beaten, stripped, hogtied, and then discarded into a stream to drown. Michael was the joy of our lives. In addition to our son, his murderers also tortured and slaughtered 2 other children, Christopher Byers and Stevie Branch. These 3 precious victims were classmates and friends, and their loss was a tragedy felt throughout the entire community. We are horrified to learn that a documentary that glorifies Michael's killers, Paradise Lost 3 Purgatory, is among 15 documentaries being considered for an Academy Award because of public pressure that exploded due to gross misrepresentations of fact in 2 previous documentaries. Michael's killers were unjustly able to enter into a plea agreement, were released from prison, and now pose additional threats to society. This 3rd documentary further insulted the families of these 3 boys and may lead to further injustice. We implore the Academy not to reward our child's killers and the directors who have profited from one of the greatest frauds ever perpetuated under the guise of a documentary film. We realize that documentaries have a point of view and advocate a position to some degree or another. As with the 2 before it, the film crossed the line into a cruel hoax that had real-life consequences larger than even those of us who still mourn our horrific losses. It is not art. This film is cynical and exploitive deception that compounds our pain needlessly and rewards those who inflicted it. And the 2 films that preceded it are simply tasteless tabloid entertainment presented as a social commentary. We are private individuals. The directors are aware of this because we refused to participate in their last 2 films. We appeared solely in the first film because the directors lied and told us their purposes would be to protect children. You can imagine our shock and disgust when the first film opened with gruesome and gratuitous images of the crime scenes and remained exploited as salacious until the credits rolled. It did nothing to promote child welfare. It did everything to support child killers and to benefit monetarily from a ghastly crime. We are hardly the only people they misled or manipulated. Consider what happened to John Mark Byers. He was Christopher Byers' adopted father. Confrontations between Mr. Byers and Eccles supporters at hearings were staged. Of course, Joe and Bruce were there to film these episodes, and they would transport Mr. Byers to the hearings and wire him for sound beforehand. Furthermore, Berlinger and Sinitsky maneuvered Mr. Byers and Eccles supporters in order to film the anticipated confrontations. Later, after the cameras were packed away, Mr. Byers acted like a different person. Instead of being belligerent, he was affable. When asked about his change in demeanor, Mr. Byers stated that he was supposed to act that way when the cameras were present. Was quoted as saying he received $500 per hour for exclusive interviews. These contrived confrontations and other distortions caused many viewers to believe Mark was the real killer. It had a terrible impact on his life. We brought this to the attention of HBO. Our complaint was ignored because these falsehoods. The complete list of distortions would take a long one. The above examples is illustrative of the manipulation and distortions that are prevalent throughout the entire Paradise Lost franchise. The films are bereft of ethics, principles, or factual accuracies and basis. Publicity from the first 2 films did generate millions of dollars in donations. Much of that money went towards the defense investigation of the case. Not a single piece of exploratory evidence was produced. In other words, between 10 million, and I'm sorry, 10 million and 20 million has been collected, although no one knows the exact amount collected or how it was spent. In 18 years, nothing was found to clear the names of the actual killers late last year. The windfall that went toward the legal defense resulted in the granting of an evidentiary hearing, which was set to be held a few weeks from now. Instead, the murderers opted to initiate a plea negotiation with the state. As a result, they remain convicted of the deaths of 3 children. We have to note that this situation is similar to the one that confronted the Academy when Capturing the Freedmans was nominated for Best Documentary Film of 2003. 2 of the Freedmen's sexual abuse victims presented another open letter to the Academy. Capturing the Freedmans had much more artistic merit and integrity than Paradise Lost 3 Purgatory, yet it did not receive the award. The Academy made the right decision then, and we pray it does so at this time as well. Sincerely, Todd and Dana Moore. So, after the 3rd installment of Paradise Lost, there's this new kid on the block called West Memphis. It's produced by Peter Jackson and directed by Amy Bird. This documentary dives into a bunch of the stuff that Paradise Lost, Purgatory did, but it zooms in a bit more on the whole deal with Damien and Lori Davis' relationship. It's like a follow-up, but with its own twist. Alright, let's break down some of the myths and set the record straight. After Paradise Lost 3, along came another documentary called West Memphis, thanks to Peter Jackson and director Amy Bird. Now, this film covered a lot of what Paradise Lost, Purgatory did, but it put more focus on Damien and Lori Davis' relationship. Now, onto the legal team behind the West Memphis 3. There are some big names here, like the Innocence Project, co-founded by Barry Scheck, the guy who defended O.J. Simpson. Talk about a legal superstar. But hold on, Chet's involvement raises eyebrows, considering his past efforts to challenge DNA evidence in the OJ case. Then there's hotshot lawyer Dennis Riordan, who took on Damien Echol's case and even had a stint representing murderer Phil Spector. Now, that's not a crowd you'd invite to a dinner party, right? The defense also brought in famous forensic pathologist Werner Spitz, who had a track record of testifying for the defense in high-profile cases like Casey Anthony and Phil Spector. But Spitz, not without controversy, accused Burke Ramsey of killing his sister in a 2016 interview. That led to a defamation lawsuit against him. So, when it comes to Spitz's credibility, it's a bit shaky. And let's not forget about the FBI profiler John Douglas, who seemed to tailor his profile to fit Terry Hobbs, similar to what he did in the Guy Paul Morin case in Canada. Now, here's the thing about FBI profilers, they're not always as accurate as they're made out to be. History shows they've missed the mark in several high-profile cases, like the Atlanta child murders and the DC Beltway sniper. So, pardon my skepticism. Now, let's address some misconceptions. The Ford plea didn't force the West Memphis 3 into a guilty plea. Their defense proposed the deal to the new prosecutor, and he accepted it, much to the dismay of some family members. It wasn't a situation where they had no other option. The defense played their cards well in this legal poker game, and don't buy into the idea that the state never lets murderers walk free. There are cases like Gertrude Binczewski, convicted of murder and later paroled, and Eric Smith, a teenager convicted of killing a child who was granted parole after serving 27 years. Now, the claim that Terry Hobbs' DNA was found at the crime scene is a bit inconclusive. Thomas Fedor, a forensic serologist, stated that the evidence was weak and could have come from about 1.5% of the U.S. population at that time, around 4.5 million people. Plus, DNA from other family members of the victims couldn't be ruled out due to testing limitations. And when it comes to testing, the defense likes to play the inconclusive card, but it's important to note that contamination issues make the results questionable. The limited quality of DNA samples from the victims, who were submerged in water for 18 to 24 hours, raises serious doubts about the conclusions drawn from the testing. So, in the grand scheme of things, the West Memphis 3 Innocence movement, as pushed by filmmakers, an advocate author, and celebrities, seems like a bunch of smoke and mirrors. It's time to separate fact from fiction in this case. Well, I wish I could wrap up the series here, but no. We've got at least 1 or 2 more episodes to dive into as we examine the consistencies and inconsistencies of Bob Ruff's forgotten West Memphis 3, which aired on the Oxygen Network. It's like the saga that just keeps on giving.
Thank you for choosing to watch Darker Things. As always, I'm your host, Doug Duncan, reminding you that once you enter the dark, you may never be the same.